Hello. Hello, gamers. Oh, for a second there, I thought the microphone didn't work, and I was already panicking. I skip one day of streaming. One day. And the entire thing comes collapsing down. Oh. Hope everyone is okay. I had my awful weekend. So on Friday I was already feeling a little bit under the weather. It was a little bit of like stuffy nose and some like a little bit of something down in my throat, and I wasn't feeling great. And then Saturday and Sunday were absolutely miserable. I was just completely out of commission for basically the entire weekend. And on Monday I still had a little bit of cough and runny nose, and I couldn't sit down in front of my computer enough for long enough to do a stream or be intelligible enough for doing a stream. So I had to basically just cancel it. I did some tests and it wasn't COVID according to the lateral flow test for that. But the symptoms list kind of matched perfectly for somebody that had like both vaccines and a booster shot in the past 4 months. So I'm not gonna say it was COVID because technically speaking the entire thing was not mapping to an actual COVID case, but I don't know. You know. The lateral flow test is not 100% accurate. So you cannot really say. Anyway, I hope to be past this, and if it wasn't COVID, it was one of the worst colds I've ever had in the past, I don't know, 5 years probably. Let's hope it doesn't happen again. I mean, I've been like I haven't been sick for the past 2 years and a half, thanks to masks and not going out of the house too often. So I hope I just skipped the worst of it and I just got a cold after 3 years of not having one. So who knows? Maybe it's just bad luck. Oh. In the meantime, though, on Friday I updated the merge request for the tagged entry in libadwaita. I haven't got feedback, mostly because the maintainer is busy, the design team is busy. We are 10 days away from GNOME 42, so that is entirely expected, and I'm not waiting for stuff for any feedback on. I'm not blocking on any feedback, to be fair. But I also went a little bit further and tried to check what the other platforms do when they have tagged entry style UI element. And one of them is AppKit on Apple. And the AppKit has a NS token field like UI control that deals mostly with taking some input and then creating like a UI element on the entry and showing a completion if available, so if there are multiple matches. But there are other like tagged entry UI elements here and there. One of them is the since I've experience with it because I use it every other day when I upload a VOD to YouTube, is the YouTube tag field, which has a similar UI element. Basically, you start typing a tag, and when you press space or comma, the tag gets yoinked from the entry and gets replaced by a UI element, a tag element, which is a kind of fairly common UI workflow. You don't even have to have completion there. It's literally will take whatever you entered and turn it into a tag. So I think we have multiple modes of operation for a tagged entry. The first mode of operation is you have an entry and then you enter tags by pressing other UI controls. So you have a text entry that is for you to enter text, but the tags are controlled by something else. And that something else can be an entirely different UI, a completion engine, something like that. You press a button, you add a tag, you can remove the tag from the tagged entry using the close button, whatever, it's fine. That is the first mode of operation. Let's call it an external mode of operation. Tags are controlled by some external entity. Entering and removing tags is controlled by an external entity. Then you have the automatic tag entry. So you enter some text and you press a delimiter, which can be user-defined. The default would be space and comma. And whatever you entered gets turned into a tag. And in that case, let's just say the mode of operation is internal as opposed to the external. So the internal one takes the contents of the entry and turns them into a tag. And that is what, again, a bunch of material, UI design, NS token field, and other similar UI elements on other platforms too. Which is okay. It's probably the simplest mode of operation that we can implement because there is no matching. We take whatever the user added to the entry and turn it into a tag. And if the user made a typo, they can delete the tag and retype it again. It doesn't require any special magic or anything else. And I'd like to implement that today. But there is one final mode of operation that is very interesting to me and we should try and implement, which is the completion mode. So you start typing, and when you reach the delimiter, the character that delimits a tag, then you take the contents and you match them against a list of, I don't know, objects, strings, whatever you want to call them. And if what you entered matches them, then we enter the tag. And then if you have multiple matches, so if you start, like if you do prefix matching, you might have multiple hits on that particular like element, a particular item inside the list, which means popping up a list of possible completions, possible all the possible matches there, and let the user select one. That is a little bit more complicated because it moves the moves the control flow from the entry to a pop-up, and then you have to select the pop-up, and then you have to enter that, and then you have to return control to the entry. So there's a little bit of focus games going on over there. And I mean, it's easy if you conceptualize it using like entering text and then using your pointer to select something. So you switch between modes, so switch between input devices. But if you make it so that it's all keyboard driven, you have to be careful about the entirety of the workflow. So the focus has to basically start typing and then you press comma, for instance. You start typing foo and then you press comma, and then the key focus gets moved automatically to the popover with all the hits, all the possible matching tags. And then you have to press down and up to move between the hits, the matches, and then press return to enter the tag into tagged entry. And then you return control to the entry itself. So there's a lot of focus like movement there, and it can get pretty tricky to deal with. But it's kind of a completion-ish mechanism. So that would be an interesting implementation. That would be an interesting feature to have there. But yeah. So what I was planning today was to do the second mode of operation. We already have the first one like written down. You can programmatically add and remove tags from tagged entry widget. We already have the API for that. So the external mode of operation is already available. What we want to do is the second mode of operation. So the automatic, the user enters some text. The next character that they entered is a delimiter character, which we will add as a potential configuration option. So the default is going to be like comma and space, but who knows, maybe it's going to be like colon or semicolon or whatever. That is going to be configurable from the application programmer perspective. And then when the user presses that, the tagged entry will take that string and turn it into a tag. So that's the second mode of operation. Oh, hi, Georges. How are you? Right. So let's switch to my builder window. There we go. So what we want to do now is add API to define the delimiter character. Let's start with the getter. So since this is going to be a list of characters, we're going to define that as a string, not as a single character. So you can define, I want space, I want comma, I want colon, whatever. Otherwise, we would have to do something that is similar in spirit to the replacement character of the password entry, or well, the GTK entry, where we take Unicode glyph. But since we want to have multiple options there, we're gonna use a string there. Oh, you're 40% in getting OBS integration working in Boatswain. That is great. Yeah, sadly I couldn't. Yeah, I wanted to work on Boatswain on this weekend, but I couldn't do anything. I was feeling terrible. I could stay in front of my computer for about half an hour at a time, and then I kept like sneezing, coughing, runny nose, the works. So I sadly couldn't work on anything this weekend. No, this is not a set, this is a getter function. Okay. Yeah, I'm feeling better. The coughing stopped on Monday evening, like Tuesday morning. It was mostly gone. A little bit of like the throat aching a little bit is not there, but I can. I can still feel it, that I'm not entirely 100% back. It's so, which is mostly why I cannot say it's COVID, because again, tests were negative, but I'm not ruling it out entirely. The description is way too close, and the effects are lingering a little bit too long for me to just say, no, it's not COVID. Yeah, on Monday and Tuesday I was able to fix a bunch of stuff in the merge request for the tagged entry, because I was able to sit in front of my computer for more than like an hour. So I was able to document all the new entry points and clean up a little bit the stuff that I left behind on Friday. So I'm feeling a lot better. Let me see here. Right. So yeah, we're gonna store the delimiter string as a string here. We are going to also add a here, and then we are going to add the getter and setter calls here. And evaluate gets from a break here, and then here as well. Yeah, we're gonna call it so. And there you go. And then we're going to free here. Okay. This is the boring part of adding properties. You always have to do this. That's all. Boilerplate. The default is going to be space, and so we're going to set it as a default there. And since it's not a constructor property, we'll have to set it ourselves here. So one of the things that trip a lot of people working with GObject the first time is that you set a default inside the gparam spec definition for the property. And people don't realize that setting the default here doesn't mean that the default is set anywhere. You have to set the default value inside your instance initialization function. This is kind of a, yeah, it's a trapdoor for GObject, but the reason why this works is because properties are not really part of GObject. Properties are, the way they are defined is not a characteristic of GObject, is a characteristic of gvalue. That's also why all the API takes a gvalue and stuff like that. So a gparam spec is not a property definition per se. People think that I'm defining a property doing this. You're not defining a property. You are defining a name and a range of values and a type for the value, the g value that you're getting. And the g value is going to be validated by this, and it's going to be like compare for like default values and stuff like that. But it has nothing to do with GObject at all. GObject uses gparam spec and gvalue to implement properties, but the underlying API has nothing to do with properties. You could literally use gparam spec and gvalue for anything you want, something that is not GObject property at all. So whenever you set a default here that is not the actual default of 0, so null, a default numerical value of 0, then you have to override it, override the default in the instance initialization function. This is also needed because so GObject guarantees that every instance is initialized to 0. So all the data inside the instance is initialized to 0. All pointers are null, or all numeric values are initialized to 0. So that is what happens by default without you having to do anything. The only properties that will be initialized to something, to default value, are constructor properties. So properties that are supposed to be passed to the constructor. In which case, GObject will, if you don't define them, will create a g-value with a default value from the gparam spec, and then will add it to the to the construction like sequence of your instance, which means that they will be set to the default value, so to speak. But you shouldn't really rely on that. It's not good. It's not a good idea at all. So to a point, setting a default value inside the gparm spec definition of the property here is not going to do you any good. The only reason why it's used is to compare whenever you pass, like, whenever you call GObject new for a constructor property that doesn't have any and you don't pass the constructor property, then it will be initialized to the value, to default value. But at that point, you could do that inside your instance in it anyway. Another consumer of that information was GTK-doc. GTK-doc would, for the specific subset of gparm spec classes provided by GObject, it would gather all the meta information for that property, so for that gparm spec. So if it was a numeric like gparm spec, it would get the minimum and maximum value, and then for everything else would get the default value, and then it would stringify it and present it inside the documentation. Considering that GDoc is now fallen out of favor with the entirety of the GNOME platform because it's unmaintained and because it's basically it's slowly bit rotting, then they're just like setting the name and the blurb for a property is kind of pointless. The introspection parser will not use the default for gparm spec string or any gparm spec, because again, it only works for the gparm specs that GObject provides. Libraries are entirely in their I don't know. They are entirely capable, and various do, to actually provide their own gparm spec to define their own property types. Clutter, for instance, has a few of them. What else? GTK has a couple of them, because it uses GTK provides new fundamental types, and new fundamental types need API to do that kind of things. And from a documentation perspective, GTK-doc doesn't know what they are, so it's pointless to parse them. And introspection parser just earlier on gave up and said, I'm not gonna even pretend to do that. First of all, because it requires running that code at runtime, and we already run a bunch of code at runtime and it's not great. So adding more code at runtime is not going to make any additional sense. And again, it's kind of pointless to have that because it only works for very specific gparm spec. So there's no real reason why that should be allowed. Okay. I will not try to Turn the entries content, turn its content into so yeah, we need a mechanism that disables this functionality. Ideally, we want this to be the default because it's a tagged entry. That's what tagged entries do. But the overall idea is that there is a way to disable it and basically just say I want this tagged entry to be controlled by external UI. Hi, Gnantifa. Yeah, I'm feeling better. Removing code always makes me feel better. To be fair, I need to feel a little bit better already in order to be able to remove code. So at this point, the question is, should we set it to null by default and then instead ask the user to enable it so it's going to be opt-in by default or opt-out? For the time being, let's keep it opt-out, but I'm not against turning it into opt-in. Okay, and at this point we need to add the usual gunk to return if pain is entry. If the string compare is 0, so delimiters and delimiters. So if it's the same thing, we return. Otherwise, we read. And then we replace it. And we notify. And yeah, this is the very basic API implementation. It's pretty trivial. Let's add a couple of let's add a documentation stanza here. I'm not gonna document it properly. I just want to add transfer none, nullable, before I forget. And same here. Even if I don't document it properly, I always add the tags here because otherwise I tend to forget this stuff. It's then picking it apart is always kind of annoying. So now that we have the infrastructure in place, we need to do the implementation. So the implementation is essentially just look at everything that gets inserted inside the entry, and when the entry changes, and when the entry, sorry, not the entry changes, when the last character of the text inserted inside the entry as is one of the delimiter characters, so in this case it's either a space or a comma, then look at the contents of the entry, look back from the current cursor position, and when we hit another delimiter or the beginning of the entry, then we slurp that text and we turn it into a tag object. And how do we do that? Well, let's see the documentation for I need a GTK. Here it is. So the editable interface has a bunch of signals, and one of them that we are very interested in is the insert text signal. Probably want a virtual function though, because it's easier to deal with that. So whenever something happens here, we get the text that has been inserted inside the editable, the number of characters, and in this case the position is an in-out argument that says here's the position of the cursor after we inserted that text. So there are sadly the editable interface is kind of messy. We inherited it from GTK, I think 2 or 3. I think it was already available in 2, but basically GTK 3. GTK 3 had a bunch of things to bounce back and forth because there are both signals and virtual functions on the interface. The signals are a mistake. They usually are. The way GTK used to provide signals in GTK 2 and 3 was subclassing light. So like low calories, all the fun of subclassing without all the calories of the boilerplate code. Sadly, that means that we have a ton of stuff that happens using signals, but it also happens using virtual functions, and those virtual functions usually can either be the ones that emit the signal, which means that implementations of that particular API contract, so an interface or a derived type, are responsible for emitting the signal or are responsible for chaining up, and the chain up emits the signal. But also, some of the interfaces and classes use a virtual function as the class closure for the signal. So a signal at the end of the day can have a default implementation. So you emit the signal, and the signal machinery will call every single handler that you register into it. So every time you do gsignal connect, it will emit your callback, and then there will be a default implementation, and then there will be all the signals, all the handlers connected using gsignal after. So gsignal class default handler signal after, connect after. That default handler can be at the end of the signal emission or at the beginning of the signal emission. That is a flag that you define when you install the signal inside your type. But it also it can be a function that you define, or it can be an offset inside the class structure, which means it will be a virtual function that you can override inside your derived type. GTK editable, being an interface, has a mess. It has an insert text virtual function, which is the class closure for the signal, the insert text signal. But it also has a do insert text virtual function, which is not that. It's the thing that will emit the insert signal text, and that will call the insert signal virtual function after insert text. Need to check the signal. Insert text is yes, because it's run last. So every time you call insert, every time the insert text signal is emitted, your code gets run first, then the default implementation gets run last, and then after that. If you lost me halfway through, like 5% in or 95% in my description, that's understandable. That's an unintended consequence, to be honest with you. We were supposed to clean up this mess, but we didn't. There's always something that manages to sneak through 4 years of development, even when you write it down. So this is kind of a mess. And it is a mess, and it's always going to be a mess until we can break API and fix this fucking thing. Such a pain in the ass. Anyway. But the signal is kind of important because it allows us to deal with this stuff, deal with input ourselves, whereas we cannot really deal with input in outside of that. We cannot deal with input without dealing with this. So, but this is also basically, this is how you do input filtering inside any GTK editable interface, any GTK editable implementation. You override the insert text, and then you get the new text. You look ahead to see if the new text is it matches what you expect, and then you how's it called? You basically insert the text, you continue the emission, the signal emission, or you continue the default mechanism, and then you modify the cursor position. Okay, so let's do an example so that we can check what we're doing. So what we want to do is going inside the editable interface in it here, and then we want to do interface insert text. Then we copy the virtual function signature, so we don't have to deal with weird stuff there. let me realign the arguments. The reason why the documentation puts the pointer unary operator near the type instead of near the name here is because it's easier to deal with from a documentation generator perspective. Inside the documentation generator, this is a type, this is a type, this is a type. They are different types, so we just print out the type and then the name here. So it's a lot easier to deal with. Otherwise, I'd have to basically figure out that int and int star are the same type, but one is a pointer, one isn't a pointer, and then I'd have to basically add a bunch of special handling code everywhere to verify that I'm using a pointer and not the bare type. Okay, so let's do something simple here. We just want to do whatever the default implementation is doing. So, right, let's see. Okay. So the default implementation of insert text for a delegate is going to be, let's open GTK so we can look at that. Not this. I don't want this. I want GTK. There we go. Good lad. So we have a few delegate inside, we have a few editable implementations inside GTK itself. They don't usually override the insert text, so let's look for yes. There we go. Right, entry completion here, for instance, is one of those, or spin button. Yeah, spin button is fine. So spin button does that, or that does what we kind of are trying to do. Okay. Right. So this is the insert text implementation. Where are you? Yeah, here it is. So the way it works is that, right, we are overriding insert text. In this case, spin button gets the text, and then it will do a bunch of transformations so that whenever you enter anything that looks like a number, it will turn it into a number using, right, okay, yeah, here. We'll use the negative sign and a bunch of other things, and it will do validation on what you're trying to enter, and so on and so forth. And then it will enter the new text inside the editable. So this one takes the delegate here, in this case the entry, and then adds the new text there. So what we want to do is do something similar to this. w entry self. Let's do this way. But also we want to print out what's happening here. Where are you? Here. And then we do text, length, and then position. So let's build it. Ah, forgot something. Probably something exceedingly stupid. Yeah, delimiters, yes. Okay, this is just gunk. And here as well. This is not file. Completely forgot how the field is called. What else did I forget here? Yeah, gclear pointer here. Okay, now what are you doing there? Come on. Oh, hi, Ivano. I have to check why this is happening. Just a little side quest. Where is it? 305? Oh, what? Yuck. Yes, this is going to be if def if mdef scanner yeah, somebody forgot about that. This was not a good idea. Somebody forgot about that. It's not done. How do I... let me... I need to check that. This stuff should be moved inside a separate file. That wasn't clever by half. Yeah, I'll have to figure this out. You should never mix files with Objective-C with files with C. That wasn't clever by half. Anyway, it's not right now. It's not important. Let's skip it, and we'll figure it out later. So let's go to tagged entries, demo. I need a little bit more room, and then we enter some text. So I don't get any output. Why I'm not getting any output? Is it building the right thing? Yeah, that is Objective-C. So one of the things that I don't like that happened, probably it's no, it's not here. One of the things that happened to libadwaita is that people are trying to port it to different platforms instead of being the GNOME platform library, because we haven't learned anything from 25 years of GTK, apparently. So this kind of thing is dealing with the settings for the high contrast and the color scheme, and that is handling both the Portal / Linux desktop case, and then it's handling the Apple and Windows use cases, the equivalent settings or whatever else there. And yeah, it's using Objective-C because that's what you use. But this stuff should not be happening inside the same source file. It should be happening somewhere else. Let me see if actually this stuff defines some public API. Settings override high contrast. This is not public API. Yeah, it's settings private. Yeah, it's all private. So at this point, we need to modify the build system actually. Build system, we need the private sources. Where is it? Yeah. Public sources, no, this is wrong. Yeah, there is a private sources there. Where are you? Yeah. Yeah, settings should not go there at all. Okay, and then the introspection should not be using, yeah, perfect. So now if we do this, okay, you should be skipping, yeah, it does. libadwaita sources are where are you? Yeah, libadwaita sources include the public and private sources. Perfect. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, basically, every time you have a source file that should not be parsed through the introspection scanner because it doesn't provide any public API, then you should separate it, because then it gets really complicated to deal with random shit like nested if-defs or like conditional compilation or crap like that. So in theory, all of this stuff should be moved. All of the stuff that is not public should be moved into this other bit so that it doesn't get parsed by the introspection scanner. It's always the most annoying thing when that happens. So let's see why it's not working. Should be printing out. Okay. Why are you not printing out? Straight. Yeah, of course. I know why it's not printing out. I'm doing this from the outside from the editable entry, but I'm inserting stuff into the text entry, which is our little delegate text here. Okay. Hi, Bilal. Init delegate, it's not. Yeah. Init delegate is part of the instance initialization, and I call it here. Yeah, it's easy to miss because it's in the middle of all this stuff. But no, the reason why this happens is because I'm not inserting text into the tagged entry. I'm inserting text inside the text widget here. So I cannot override the insert text on the outer editable when I have a delegate inside. I mean, I can, because then things like calling GTK editable set text will work. But in order to intercept that, in order to intercept what I'm entering actually inside the editable, the text entry, then I'll have to set up this stuff. In a perfect world, the delegate would root inside the outer widget, and then the outer widget would then set stuff inside the inner widget. So you would always intercept at the outer widget from the outer widget. But since we don't live in a perfect world, yeah. Let's see if we can make this work with a minimal amount of hackery involved. On text, insert text. Okay. It's going to be GTK editable. And then we are going to be calling, we're not going to stop anything. We are just going to be calling this function. Then we're going to see what happens there. What the hell are you doing? Yeah, this is why it's always right. Okay, now it's working correctly. We're intercepting the signal here. Okay. So how do we deal with this? Okay. Let me double check one other thing here. Editable. Delete text. So if we do this as well, text, delete text, and it's going to be start pause, end pause, and use data. Start pause. Ah, for fuck's sake. And then we have to connect the signal there as well. So let's see. Entry, so if we do this, then we delete. Okay. Right. So we could do this, and let's store the our platform, and then we do this. Okay. Actually, no, we want to use a G string. Calling it a G string is always, why did we call it G string? It's so inappropriate. Okay, so and okay. Okay. And then we do this. Need to double check the API. There we go. Yeah, so string arrays. So buffer. Right. And minus. Yeah. Okay. So at this point we do gprint current buffer. So buffer. And do gprint buffer. Buffer. Oh. So what I'm doing here is I'm using an accumulation buffer to ensure that all my text entry and removal gets recorded. So if I do this, the current buffer is foo here. If I delete these two, current buffer is f, and the current buffer is fa, and so on and so forth. Okay, so I basically implemented a quick and dirty buffer for whenever I insert and remove some text inside the tagged entry. So let's remove all of this here because I don't care about this now, and same for this. If you delete text without having inserted any, then clearly something happened, so we just bail out. Another condition for bailing out, both in terms of delete text and insert text, is if the self delimiters are null, because we don't want any peeking inside our buffer right now, so we don't care about that. So if we disable this stuff, we don't get any of this. Okay, so let's look inside the current text. We want to look at the out of curiosity, why do you use printer instead of gprint or gmessage? I use gprinter because I like printing stuff to the standard error. Habit, honestly, just habit. It's just that I use the standard error for most of my debugging messages, so I only have to care about that. You would think that one of the people working on glib and GTK, but I'm technically one of the glib maintainers. You would think that one of the glib maintainers would use the glib logging facility. Old habits die hard. I'm just gonna say that. I'm used to using the standard error for my debugging messages since before I started using glib. On non-glib code, this would look like this. And you will find in most of my code, all the debugging is done like this. So from an historical perspective, I used to do this because most of my initial programs were command line programs, and command line programs output all the useful output on standard output and all the debugging stuff on standard error. So you have those two separated. So yeah, that's yeah. No, it's a very small brain. It's definitely not like giga brain kind of behavior. It's just me being used to this when I was still working on command line. Okay, so we want to know what is the last character inside our buffer. So and it's going to be self buffer string self buffer length. It should be line -1 because, of course, length is going to be the 0. So, and then we want to do let's see, 1 second. Yeah. So we do for 0 we are going to do we'll use gsize at this point. Size delimiters. Okay, so if last equals self delimiters 9. Okay, so this is our successful condition. Now we go through every single character inside our delimiter our char array, which is a string just for convenience, but it's literally a byte array where every byte is the delimiter function, is the delimiter character. And then we compare it to the last element of the array of the buffer. And here we're just there. Alright. Whoa, what the hell happened here? Oh yeah. Pointers. And there we are. Okay. So now that we are able to find the delimiter inside our temporary buffer, what are we going to do? Well, first of all, we are going to turn this into a tag. So we are going to do a w tag I need to open up the tag header. We're gonna do set label and then set show close without an icon though. So our label is going to be the current buffer here up until the delimiter. So we are going to do, let's use GAuto and then string duplication of self string until -2. We don't want to insert also the delimiter here, so we're going to use label and then we do editable tag entry add tag. So the ownership is transferred. So let's see what happens here. Oh, too much. Oh yeah. Yeah, it's stringed up. It's one too many. So let's try again. Right. Okay. So now we have to go back. Well, as you can see, now this stuff works there. So whenever we insert bar, it will create a tag for that. That is fine. The last part is we need to unroll this and remove it from the entry. So we need to basically just stop the signal emission there. So we need to remove that. First of all, we need to unroll all the buffer there. So we need to delete the text from the editable. Here. So we need to delete the text at the starting of from basically the 0 position to the buffer length here. And then stop the signal emission. So editable. Stop emission is stop emission by name. So we don't want the text to be inserted inside the text at all. But we also want to remove everything that came before that. So we want to do GTK editable, delete text from 0 to itself. Well, everything before, so it's going to be 0 minus 1. Yeah, then the characters deleted doors from start pause to the end of text. The reason why we cannot use length here is because it's so we cannot use length anywhere because length is the size in characters, whereas we want to operate on bytes here. And here we also clean up the buffer on delete text, so our buffer will be nullified. So let's see what happens when we build this way. We're emitting a signal inside another signal emission. It's not great. So we'll have to figure out if we are not causing some bad stuff. But no, seems to be working. Ooh. And here we go. Okay. Yeah, that was... There are a couple of things there that are not great. We also still need to do all of this for the editable overrides as well. So right now the callbacks for signals work fine for us because we are entering text directly. But if we call GTK editable set text on the tagged entry, then these signals would not be emitted. Well, they would probably be emitted anyway, but let's see. I'll have to double check. I don't want to say something stupid here, because there are a bunch of delegation layers in between, and if we end up doing something stupid, that is going to cause some loop and some like reentrancy issue. But yeah, so what we've done is we want to intercept everything that happens inside our text widget, and we connect to the insert text and delete text signals. And inside those, we build up a buffer with the current contents of the text. So we incrementally update a buffer, and when that buffer contains what looks like a tag, using the delimiters characters that we specify in our configuration, then we turn that into an actual tag and remove it from the contents of the editable widget. We need to stop the signal emission here, because otherwise the contents will be inserted, and then we don't want that. So we are preventing the last character to be inserted, or the last insertion operation to be added. Hi, Jeff. We do this at the insert level and the delete level so that we don't accidentally do stupid things when adding text and backspacing or removing a selection or something like that. But yeah, this one already looks a lot like, let's see, I have an example here. Yeah, if you have ever used the YouTube Studio UI, you will see that you have a tags entry field, and you type the tags and you press a comma after each tag, and it turns the text into an actual tag widget. This is essentially what I'm going for, and I think it's also what the design team is looking for in terms of UI. What we're missing is the completion here. Completion is a little bit more complicated than this. Completion requires a list model of all the potential completion values, and then requires matching that completion with the contents of the text entry with those values. And also, if needed, it needs to pop up something to display that. Another thing that is, for instance, here in the search entry tags is a menu, so you can change the tag there. But in that case, it's really it's not really on the tag, it's on the tagged entry widget. You set the menu there with all the potential tags, and then you select one of these and it will add a tag and remove a tag depending on. We could, I don't know if we can add an example for that, but it's possible to do it. Would be a separate example inside the demo, but yeah. Basically, this is the current demo. This, instead of having add tag and remove tag here, you would have a popover here that showed all the possible tags, and then when you press a tag, it would add it to the tagged entry. So it would be a separate demo. Yeah, that was a lot less awful than I thought it would be. Let me drop this because I want to double check another thing. There, yeah, insert text here, doesn't matter there. Bam, and remove the gprinter view. Right. We can also do this instead. And then we can do this. This one should work as well. We remove a pointer there. But yeah. In theory, another iteration of this would be interesting to look at is if you copy a bunch of tags, which are essentially just a string with comma separated values. If you do that, then it will turn every single one of them into yeah, a tag. So instead of checking just the last, we iterate over the entire string, and every time we find a comma, we take whatever it was that preceded it, and then we update the buffer, and then we continue on and on. Yeah, it's possible to do that. Ooh. Yeah. Yeah. Let's start with this. This is GTK, and I'm not inside GTK. Inside libadwaita. Let's document this stuff as well. Okay. Entry a string of the not a string. Sets the vectors as a delimiter for automatic. Whenever the tab entry contains whenever mention character is inserted in the tab entry, the current contents of the entry are placed by and the right. If the delimiters is null, then the automatic tag insertion is disabled. That's it. That's fine. Okay, so let's commit this stuff. And automatic tab insertion to the we can use the contents of the entry to automatically add Now the rest of this stuff is this is another thing that I was doing. So one of the things that I left undone in the stream on Friday was the ability to specify to style tags. So tags are actually widgets now, or at least tags are objects. They are completely separate. They are model objects, essentially. The idea is that you reflect that model with a view, and that view is a widget. And you can style that widget. The documentation even explains you how. They have a tag CSS name, and it's fine. But sometimes you want to style stuff with additional classes for your own application. You want a red tag, you want a green tag, you want a blue tag, whatever, it's fine. So you want to add a CSS class for that tag. But right now you cannot define the style for that tag. You can only match the tag widget as it is. So one thing that I've done was adding a name property to the tag object. You specify the tag name. The tag name is mostly meant as a debugging feature. You can have the same name for multiple tags, for instance. It doesn't really matter. There's no validation performed. In that regard, is very, very similar, but pretty much the same thing as the GTK widget name property. But one thing that you can do is use that name as a CSS class on the tag widget that reflects the model, the tag model, which means that whenever you set the name, you add a CSS class to the tag widget. It's one thing that I added, but I did not commit yet. But yeah, basically the way I envision this is you specify a bunch of classes that you want your tags to have applied, and then whenever you create a new tag, you specify the name, and that applies the class. Right now it's a single name, which means it's a single class. I'm not entirely sure I want to expose more. The other option is to have a vector of strings and basically say exposed on the tag, and say these are the names on the tag, kind of CSS names, and then on the widget we apply all of them as CSS classes. There is another thing that I'm not entirely sure in the API, which is right now the tag name property is you can set it whenever you want, but setting the tag requires equating the tag name with CSS classes, requires a little bit of finesse. You can remove CSS classes that you already know, but if you replace the name, you'd have to get the old name from the tag and then set the new name, remove it from the CSS classes and add the new name. And we cannot really do that. We are notified when the tag name changes. We don't have access to the old name. We only have access to the new one. And that will require removing every single CSS class and then adding the new one. which isn't something that you can do. I mean, yeah, you'd have to get the CSS classes as a string and then remove them all and then add them. But removing them all, it means that you are basically, you cannot remove the classes that libadwaita adds itself. So it gets pretty tricky. The other option would be to have the name of the tag as a construct only property. So you create a tag and it doesn't have any name, or you create a tag and you pass a name. So if you want to style it differently, you style it differently. Otherwise, you get the default styling. And if you want to change the styling, then you have to remove the tag and add a new tag. So you have to decide upfront, which isn't a great. I mean, there is no API that is great at this point, but this is kind of those are our options. Either we style it up front, or we decide to style it up front, or we don't. So either you get the neutral tags or you get the stylable tags, which is an option. I mean, we'd have to do something like this: editable available in all. Then we'd have to remove the set name here. Constructor, we align it, and then we do set property, get property, not set name because that doesn't exist anymore, but we do self name equals g value dot string just to be on the safe side. And then the name property construct only. We also add something here. Tag widget name of the tag creates a new tag object with the event name. And then set name gets removed. Where are you? Here. Set name is dropped. We also have to document a little bit the name property. The name is used for debugging purposes or for styling. There is no deduplication in both. No. Check there. Alex, wait, and that's pretty much it, I'd say. So this is, yeah, kind of a way to implement this. So instead of creating a, if you create an empty tag, if you create a tag without a name, you cannot style it. You get the default appearance of the tag inside your theme. If you use the new with name variant, then you specify a name, and the name can be used for styling purposes. That is roughly how I see it. And then inside the tag widget, we do a very simple give me the name when you set the tag, and we add the CSS class there. Yeah, that is pretty much it. Yeah, I think this is a good place to stop. The completion code is going to be complicated. So the way I kind of envision the completion code is going to be something like this. Void, come on, entry, set set model, no, set set match model. Naming stuff is really complicated. And then we pass a list model here. So everything inside this this. We can also set nullable here. Matching tag. Every new okay, it is compared to the contents of the comparison is automatic if model is plus GTK string model. Otherwise, you need to call method tag entry set match and provide a match. So the overall idea is that if you pass a string GTK string model, which is a glist model implementation that contains a bunch of string objects, which are objects that contain a string. So it's a little bit of an indirection, but essentially it's that. We can do comparison automatically because we're comparing strings to strings. It's fine. If you're passing a more complex widget, a more complex model, so a model that contains, for instance, a list of models, or another list of models, or a tree of models, or a list model of complex objects like contacts objects, then you will have to provide your own function there, which is going to be something like this: boolean editable entry match fung char text object item pointer preset. So the match function, you will be passed the tagged entry widget, of course. Then you get past the text, which is the current the tag that matches well, the text of the entry. We could not pass the text. We could tell you can call GTK editable get text. It's probably convenience to avoid that. And then you get past the item inside the model, the current item inside the model. So this function gets called for every item inside the model, and the first one that returns true is the match. It's the trivialist possible match function. And then we have here w entry set fung. Data, and then g destroy notify here. This is another classic requirement for any library that takes a function pointer. You pass the function pointer there, but you also pass the user data that will be passed to the function when it gets called, and you want a notify function because you want to have the ability to call a function to release all the resources that you pass to as user data. Language bindings kind of require this. But it's not just language bindings. If you pass some pointer here that you allocated at some point, you want to have the ability to release that memory. So this is how I kind of see this happening. Inside our tagged entry here, instead of just taking the label here, we go through every single element inside the list model. We call the match function, and if the match function returns true, then we add the tag. Otherwise, we don't add the tag, we add the text. That is the trivial implementation. Let's just be clear. That is the trivial implementation. The more complex implementation instead is being able to filter all the elements in the list model using a filter model. But the filter model can return more than one result, especially if it's like a bunch of potential values there. The other thing is we are now matching the exact word when we enter a delimiter there. But we might want to show a completion while we are entering the word. But that kind of gets into like text completion territory, and text completion is a little bit more complicated than this. You don't use delimiters at all. You have to basically pop up stuff, and yeah, it's not trivial there. But yeah, that's another possibility for a tagged entry there. Yeah. We're not going to do this now because there are a bunch of like weird cases that I need to explore a little bit more off stream, because otherwise we're going to stay here for 5 hours. And I honestly cannot stay here 5 hours. Yeah. I want to explore them a little bit off stream, and then on Friday I want to go and see what we can do with models and stuff. Because there's another thing that we can do, and it's a little bit more involved, and I'd like to first understand it completely on my side, or at the very least like 80% of my side, which is using expressions. So right now we can trivially match a string object with the text that we have. But another thing we can do is to have an expression. So if you have an object that has a string property somewhere, then you might want to match that string property with the text. You don't want to write a match function for that. So adding an expression would be a very interesting addition to the API. An expression, if you've never heard of them, is essentially a property binding on steroids. The actual definition that I used once was property binding on crack and steroids. Basically, you define an expression is essentially like this. So you want an expression that takes the object and the object property there, or takes an object that has a property with another object that has a property called name. So yeah. And if you have a list model of objects, then you can still reconduce everything to that particular scenario, and you don't have to write a match function that does all of this by itself. GTK expression will do most of all the heavy lifting for you, but also can do things like matching constants and stuff like that. And this is the neat part. If you are building the entire thing inside your UI definition file, including the model and the tagged entry, you can define an expression inside the UI definition file, which means that you don't have to write any code at all, except the code that loads up the list model, which is pretty powerful and a feature of GTK4 that is really useful for cutting down the amount of code that you have to write. But yeah, I want to double check a bunch of APIs first, because I need to get. Honestly, I've never used expressions. It's never been necessary for me to do that. But in this case, I want to provide an API. Well, sorry, it's not that I never used expressions. I never had to implement a widget that used expressions. That is different. Using expressions is another thing. So I want to understand a little bit better that case. And if that works, then we can add that as an API. It will look a lot like this. Set expression. So yeah, instead of setting the match function, set the match expression, and GTK does everything for you behind the scenes. If you have a list model of objects that have properties, that have properties, that have properties, and so on and so forth. For instance, yeah, if you have a list model of contacts, for instance, and every contact has I don't know, the nickname or the email address or something like that, then as a property. Even if it's a property on an object inside the contact, then you can have an expression that says, please give me the data pointed to this expression, like 3 objects deep or whatever, and compare it to the string inside the tagged entry. And again, you don't have to write it inside the code. You can write it directly inside the UI definition file, because then we can add a match expression property to the tagged entry, just like we add a match model. And at that point, you can define everything inside the UI definition file, and you're done. It's a little bit easier to modify, to expand and encode without having to modify the source code. Yeah, let's go back to my big head. Oh, because it's time for ending the stream. That was a lot less complicated than I thought, but in reality, the complication is just arriving. We'll see on Friday how to make the matching work with models and functions, and then with expressions as well. So on Friday is probably going to take a little bit. It's going to be a little bit of a long stream, because I'll have to double check the code against existing implementations and inside GTK to verify that I'm doing things right. But other than that, I think we're fine. So the usual outro for YouTube. If you enjoy watching me work on GTK, libadwaita, and the GNOME software development platform, then feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel, where I post a VOD of my streams. And if you instead want to watch me do this thing live, then come on Twitch, twitch.tv/abassi, and follow me there, and you will get a notification every time I go online, which is usually Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 4 p.m. London time. For everyone who's still here, thank you very much for following along. I hope you learned something about GTK and libadwaita, and you had fun. If you have specific requests or questions, or you want to know, or you want to see me work on specific bits of the GNOME platform or GTK, then feel free to leave a comment here in chat or on YouTube. I read all of them, so I'll make sure to take that into consideration for new streams. I do hope you will have a great rest of your day, great rest of Wednesday, and I shall see you all on Friday. Bye.